If you can see this, please press 1. Hey RC, how you doing? Not where I live. It's kind of cold and cloudy. It's all good, man. So this is a video I've been wanting to create for a while. Because you see all these videos on the internet talking about the Mandela effect and what is it and why does it happen and what are we actually experiencing. So I wanted to create this video. I'm going to give a few more minutes for about 5 more minutes for people to start showing up and whoever wants to actually watch it along with us. Thank you. I have the chat on another screen if you're wondering why I keep looking over. Also, if you guys have any questions during this, feel free to ask, because I pretty much have it down to a good explanation as to why the Mandela effect happens, as well as what you're actually experiencing. Because I have a few stories that I want to share along with this specifically that he's going to be talking about. And if you guys have any stories you'd like to share, feel free to put them in the box as well. And this goes back to the one time I actually got to go to a Bashar event like 8 years ago. Because I want to share this story before anything else happens or anyone else starts talking. So I was sitting in I was in between the break for the 4-hour session that Bashar actually had done, and I sat there and I was talking to a woman that had a private session with Bashar like a year or two beforehand, and she said that she found a beaker behind her desk, and she asked Bashar where was this beaker from, and what Bashar told her during her private session with him is that the beaker was going to be explained by someone else, and that person was actually me. So what had happened with the beaker was simply this. She shifted, it was from a remnant from another reality that she had experienced. That's actually an example of a Mandela effect. It's that side effect of passing from one reality to another one. It's a remnant. It's like if you remember reality being one way, or your things like food packaging or just stuff in your. It's a parallel reality that's actually similar to the one that we're currently in. Oh, that's pretty common, RC. Like, I know when I first started out with him as well. I actually, if you ever watched the transmission, the 13th step, he actually talks about this where you make a big enough shift where the people in your life remember you, but they don't quite remember. They're like, I know you, but there's something different about you. I've actually had this happen to me, and it's hilarious because I also because I took the 13th step, and it was amazing because I ended up getting some. I had just heard Bashar talk about this because I went through all his previous like transmissions that he had up until that point, and it was so freaking amazing because I had made such a big shift at that point that everyone's like, I know you. We've spent time together, but I don't know who you are. What is your name? And he actually talks about that at one point, but that's also another side effect of what we term the Mandela effect. So if you're ready to go and you're ready to, for at least the people that are watching right now, if you're ready to start watching this, please press 1 in the chat. All right, let's begin. This is from the transmission, the parallel reality.
Let us say good day to you this day of your time. We will begin this transmission by reminding you that this title is The Parallel Reality Wheel. Now, for the purpose of this particular transmission, the terms parallel reality, alternate universe, alternate timeline, parallel timeline, all of these terms in this context are basically the same. And what we are referring to is that sequence of frames that your consciousness shifts through to create the continuity of what feels like, what you experience to be a smooth, unbroken timeline that you think of as your life path, as your experience in physical reality. However, in order to allow you more ability to navigate more consciously through the different frames of different parallel realities that make up your timeline, so that you can more consciously navigate yourself in the directions of the reality, the version of Earth that you prefer, we are going to bring you this little exercise, this little permission slip that can begin to sort of shake you loose, loosen you up a little bit more from your particular timeline that might be created by certain belief systems, so that you have a little bit more ability to break your continuity. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to lose touch with what you consider your typical reality to be. It's not about going that far. Nevertheless, this exercise, as we describe it to you, can, as we say, expand your imagination, expand your consciousness to a greater degree, to give you a little bit more ability to start choosing frames in the different parallel realities that are far more representative of the timeline that you prefer to experience. Now,
So I want to stop right here for like 2 seconds. So when you talk about the Mandela effect, it's exactly that. It's the parallel reality that you're choosing to experience at that moment. A lot of the Mandela effect itself is actually you shifting from a parallel reality.
at first, it may seem that the different parallel realities we are going to present to you for your consideration may take you farther away from the timeline that you need to experience in this life. But it's just that we're going to stretch those imagination muscles a little bit. They will snap back to some degree to the general reality that you need to experience that's relevant for you. But nevertheless, we have to take you a little bit farther afield into other realities just to give you a little bit of that stretching ability. So it's not about detaching or dissociating from your timeline, but it's about stretching yourself to give yourself a little bit more of a broader perspective of the different things that are possible and probable in your reality, and to break the continuity that you've been experiencing for thousands of years just a little bit more, so you have more flexibility, more freedom to choose, and more conscious awareness that what you consider your single, unbroken timeline to be is in fact constructed from a large number of different parallel reality versions of Earth. And again, this exercise will help you navigate through them in a way that can allow you to automatically, without even sometimes thinking about it, start choosing the frames in different realities that are most conducive to building up, to constructing that single timeline that is most representative of your true self and most reflective of the version of Earth that you will create yourself to experience.
So anytime Bashar has ever sat there and talked about how you're not just traveling down one straight line. You're bouncing around all over the place simultaneously to all these different realities. And one moment you'll remember one thing, and one moment you'll remember another thing entirely. This is what he's talking about.
So, first and foremost, let us now show you an example of the parallel reality wheel graphic. As you can see, there are 8 different parallel reality suggestions here. Each of these, in a sense, is a real reality, and each of these is somewhat close to your own reality experience, but there are several things that are different, as you can see. In the first one, whereas in what you consider your history to be at the moment, you have a so-called memory of an individual named Albert Einstein who proposed what you call the theory of relativity. But as you can see in this graphic, in a slightly different parallel reality, an individual with a slightly different name, Albrecht Eisenstein, was the individual who proposed relativity for that particular parallel universe. As we have spoken of a little bit before,
I have actually done this exercise a number of times, and I can tell you that the more you do it, the more you open up to the possibility and what happens in those realities. Because I've actually experienced those realities as memories, as like shifted into those realities and then shifted back to this one.
even though in your memory, your President Kennedy died in your 1963, you can see in a parallel reality that he survived 2 terms and only died in 1985. You can see that these other realities depicting slightly different histories, also just as real as your own reality, are what will allow you, as we explore them later in the meditation, to stretch your imagination muscles to understanding how slight differences can actually create profound differences that create more difference between what you consider your timeline to be and other alternate universal timelines to be.
There's also, so when I was a kid, and I want to share this before we get too much further, I had a cat named Boots. Loved this cat. He was a big old white, black and white fluffy cat. I remember picking him up and then him dying in my hands when I set him on the ground. My mom remembers him actually, that happened to my sister, not me. The reality that I came from, the cat died in my hands. The reality my mom came from, it happened to my sister. Little things like that.
But by, in the meditation, taking the time to go deeper into some or all of these different parallel reality histories, you can allow yourself a little bit more freedom to unlock from what you consider your history to be, knowing that it changes every single time that you change yourself. Because as we have said, as you change the present, you actually change the past that goes with it and the future that goes with it, since past and future are illusions anyway. It's all in the present, but each timeline has its own unique history, its own unique past and future experiences in your space-time perspective reality. And so anytime you make a shift, that you navigate yourself through different frames in your present, you're going to bring along with that the linear past and the linear future that is relevant for that particular present. Because as you change yourself into a different person, logically speaking, from a linear perspective, you have to have had a different history, a different past that brought you to this point to create the person that you are now. So everything shifts with you as you shift your present. And again, by exploring some of the differences in the different parallel realities that we present to you in this parallel reality game, then you can begin to stretch your imagination a little bit further and allow yourself more freedom to begin to really explore what is probable for you, to break the continuity a little bit from your assumptions and insistences and expectations of the past, and really begin to give yourself a little bit more freedom to be the person you prefer to be in the present, so that you can allow yourself to experience the timeline that is most relevant for you.
And before we go too much further, I want to show you guys this real quick, if I can help it, because I didn't put it up on the right thing first to start with. So this is also an example of a parallel reality. There was a guy who shifted to, like, he found some sort of doorway, and this actually, September 9th, he shifted to a reality where the Beatles never broke up and John never died, and they actually created a whole nother album. That's what this is actually from. It's another reality. And he actually was able to bring back with him from that reality this tape of this album that the Beatles created in a reality where they didn't break up. So if you get a chance to, the music's actually on here. I've listened to it. It's pretty good.
So as you scan some of these different parallel realities and begin to contemplate them, as you will, as we guide you through this in the meditation to come, in the exercise to come, you can begin bit by bit, a little bit at a time, nothing drastic, to feel yourself and your imagination stretching a bit and contemplating other probabilities you may not have considered that might be more probable for you, that are more in alignment with your passion, your creativity, your ability to be more and more of who you truly are. So we will now remove the graphic, if it has not already been removed, and allow yourselves to simply relax as we go into the main body of this transmission with our interactions. But we will come back to this and present this graphic to you again in the meditation in such a way as to guide you in a variety of different ways that you can utilize this permission slip to your advantage.
Well, RC, what you're anchoring to is what your vibration is in that moment. Like, anytime that you're coherent or staying in one reality, particularly like this one. It's actually you've shifted to the reality where you're more focused on this reality or that reality. It's your consciousness has shifted to different realities. It's not necessarily if you feel like you're drifting away, it's because you're defining that way. It's just your consciousness shifts to the different realities. Because remember, everything exists simultaneously. That's kind of like the important part to remember. It's you're getting what's relevant for you to actually understand. I'm going to see... I should have prepared this a little bit better, but I just kind of did this at the last minute.
So we thank you for allowing us to present this technique, this tool, this permission slip to you this day to allow yourselves more freedom to be who you truly are. And so we will now move forward with our interactions with you in questions and answers.
Absolutely.
Hello, Bashar.
And to you, good day.
Thank you so much. It's always such an honor.
I think I'm going to skip to... because I know they're... I want to skip to this one because there's a lot of similar questions that you always see in like every other Bashar event. Let's get rid of this.
Going has to make sense in terms of one of the occupations that are typical upon the earth.
What kind of games do they play together?
Different kinds. Sometimes one particular popular idea is, let's pretend to live on Earth. Let's act like an Earth human. Let's see how convincing we can be.
And so can you give us a little scenario of the kind of dialogue that would go on in an example like that?
I am walking down one of the human streets on Earth. Someone comes up to me and asks me where I am going. First I say, hello, how are you?
I'm going to try to skip ahead to where Bashar is actually explaining the parallel reality wheel a little bit more thoroughly. I'm going to actually jump around quite a bit in this one because, let's see. I know these live stream questions usually have quite a bit.
As in the guided meditation, the idea of a particular parallel reality that will allow you to stretch to begin with.
Here we go. Also, keep in mind, I kind of have to jump around to a lot of this stuff, so I'm not just putting the straight transmission up on YouTube. I'd get a copyright claim if
Hello,
I did that.
Tadeo.
Nania.
We have some questions from our streaming viewers.
All right, please proceed.
Okay, regarding the parallel reality wheel, do we think of it as a large wheel we spin for prizes like on a game show? Or more like a steering wheel we can
limitation
control?
can be used in a positive
You
way.
can think of it either way. As we explained, you can use your imagination to alter it however you wish, as long as you get the opportunity to explore, as in the guided meditation, the idea of a particular parallel reality that will allow you to stretch your senses so to apply that stretching to your present timeline. So you may do it however you wish.
Okay. And when you see so many realities at the same time, how do you know which one you are actually in?
We know only, and this is all we need to know, that we are always navigating through the ones that are in alignment with the state of being we have chosen to be in. Therefore, we automatically navigate through all the ones that are appropriate for us, creating an overall timeline that is appropriate for us. So we don't have to specifically know exactly which timeline we are in at any given
2019.
moment, because we know it's the right one for us.
And for us, how do we know which one we're actually in, since we can see so many?
Again, if you follow the formula that we have given you, you are automatically navigating through the ones that are in alignment with the state of passion, with your true self, as you choose to be in that particular state of vibrational frequency. You don't have to intellectually know which one you're in. You don't know that right now. Remember, you are creating what appears to be your timeline, building it up out of many different parallel realities already. It's not that you have to specifically know at any given moment which one you're in, because you're shifting billions of times per second. All you have to know is that the combination of parallel realities you're shifting through is creating a sense of continuity in an overall timeline experience that is aligned with the state of being that you choose to be in. You can't have it otherwise, because again, remember, the physics is you can't experience something that is not reflective of the state of being you're in. So in that sense, you are always in the parallel reality, positively or negatively, that is aligned with the state of being you're in. So that's why it's so crucial to follow the formula and always be acting on your passion, because then you know that if you are precisely following the formula, you're only going to navigate through those parallel realities that are the ones that are conducive to continuing to expand you in positive, creative, loving way.
Okay, and what evidence will we have that we are living in a higher dimension? And how do you know if you've already shifted to a higher dimension?
More and more synchronicity that serves you in a positive way.
We're in the
more and more
process.
flexibility and malleability in the idea of time and space, so that things can happen in an amount of time that might some way seem almost impossible that it could have happened that way. You will experience less of the idea of time. You'll be living more in the present in a variety of ways. And over time, you will see fewer and fewer and fewer representations over the years of realities that are simply not vibrationally compatible with you. Depends on the rate at which you yourself allow yourself to remain in the positive state, that determines how quickly or slowly you may move through this process.
So I want you guys to say, add this to the chat. How many of you have experienced people in your life or things in your life just starting to disappear? Whether it's one way or another, positive, negative, you just notice, like, because I've noticed in the last few years, just people spontaneously disappearing out of my reality for one reason or another, and now they're just no longer even remotely in my reality.
But nevertheless, you will see more symptoms. Also, your senses will expand so that you can begin to perceive things that were heretofore invisible to you. Other dimensional beings, the idea that people are seeing energy, lights, UFOs, other kinds of information being received by you, downloaded into you in a more perceivable way, that you're more consciously aware of receiving this kind of information, that you're becoming more lucid in physical reality and seeing it as a projection of consciousness, experiencing it more that way, so that from time to time, physical reality seems a little less solid, a little less real.
And I can tell you, as I've gone along the path, my whole reality has become incredibly malleable depending on what my state of being is at that moment. As you shift into higher fourth density or lower fourth density, reality becomes so malleable.
These are many of the symptoms, not all, but many of the symptoms of accelerating into the fourth density, higher physical reality vibration.
Thank you. If there's parallel realities, each one having a slightly different version of me, then how do I know choosing a parallel reality can make a difference, since
Percy,
I'm in
pay
all
attention
of
to this.
them?
You are not in all of them. The idea is that each of those versions is its own distinct person. But the idea is that what you experience through continuity as a change in yourself is not a change in your personality. It is a shift of your consciousness to express itself through a completely different personality, a completely different person. So any change, as we have said, is a total change. And since you are shifting billions of times per second, you are literally shifting your consciousness through billions of people per second, billions of versions of you. But versions of you are not you in the sense of the personality. It's only you in the sense of your consciousness, your overall consciousness that perceives itself to be itself. But any change in what you consider your personality to be is actually your consciousness now perceiving through a different person entirely.
We're also at the beginning of the window of open contact as of this year, as we're currently going through everything. If you watch something that I put out a while ago, that's actually what he was talking about. But we're getting our frequencies going up, so we're actually becoming more into a state where we can potentially actually interact with them in person. It's just we got to keep going up in our frequency so we can match their state of being, or else they will burn us out.
And so that also applies to the idea of being an infinite being that always
Absolutely,
exists,
John.
because everything is always perceived as happening, in a sense, to you.
Correct.
Regardless of what environment, what reality you're experiencing.
Correct.
It's a very interesting phenomenon.
Yes. But that's how it works in terms of the different levels working together. When someone uses the word I, me, you, things like that, they have to understand what level they're actually referring to. If you're referring to the personality level, well, that's constantly changing because it's a projection of consciousness. It's an artificial construct anyway. In a sense, you are channeling.
Absolutely. There's no other
people
place to be other than in the
different
present
realities.
moment.
Different versions, so to speak, are different people.
It's
and
the
you're
place where all your
constantly
gifts
shifting
are.
through them. But when you talk about yourself perhaps as the idea of an oversoul, then you can constantly say, yes, I am having all these different experiences, all these different incarnations simultaneously. But the individual soul, the individual higher mind, the individual physical mind and personality can only refer to itself, and it is not anyone else. It is simply who it is as an individual expression or reflection of the higher levels of the greater being that you are.
RC, I will also say this much. That's why he always says act on your assignment, or RC or Ryo says follow your bliss, those kind of things. It's because when you do act on your excitement, or you do follow your bliss, you're usually more likely to be in the present moment because you're here and now. Your focus and your consciousness is more focused on the here and now instead of the past or the future. Because when you look at the past, you're going to become depressed. When you look at the future, you're going to become anxious. The only place you can really open your presence is the here and now. That's why it's called the present. It's a gift.
So if your personality construct is constantly changing, but it always continues to exist, is that correct?
Yes, because other aspects of the greater being are expressing themselves through it simultaneously. It's not a matter of the idea of leaving it empty. It's a matter of the idea of understanding that what, quote unquote, your greater being experienced a moment ago as coming through one personality is still being experienced by that aspect of your greater being. But now the greater being has also allowed itself to experience another personality perspective, and that's going on simultaneously too. It's simply shifting, in a sense, its attention in a certain way to allow that personality to think it's the only one having that experience.
So this is a fun ability that's carried over from my Sasani connection counterpart, is they have this ability to shift to a bunch of different realities simultaneously, and then they come back and bring the information from them. So one of the abilities that's carried over that I have in this body and this being is I can shift to any reality I want to because I know I have that counterpart, and a lot of their abilities have carried over to me. So I've been able to shift my consciousness into a lot of different realities. It's kind of fun. The more you act on your assignment, you actually start functioning more like the Sasani, like Bashar, like Ryo, like Shale, or any other of the counterparts that we all have.
I know this can be a little bit confusing to the idea of third and fourth density physical reality perceptions, but nevertheless, it's simply a matter of understanding that everything is going on simultaneously. Nothing ever actually stops being experienced. It's just that holographically, simultaneously, the greater being can experience, or the personality can be experienced by the greater being as being the only thing that is being experienced at that moment. But that perspective is only coming from the physical personality.
So, John, if you realize that everything in your reality is just an aspect of you, whether it's the past, future, anything. It's just being able to tap into the vibration specifically of what's happening or where you want to actually connect to. So I've had realities where I don't even remotely look like human. I've had realities that I've tapped into that I look very, very close to this version of me, or I have versions of me that I've counterparts that are in other civilizations or in the Atlantean area or any number of time periods. Because my consciousness is lucid enough, I'm able to shift to whatever reality I need to in the moment to get the information. Let's get back to it.
That perspective is not coming from the greater being, the oversoul, or something higher up. That's experiencing things simultaneously.
And so since all aspects continue to exist,
Does that help?
and they exist simultaneously, then technically you can connect with any version of your personality that has ever existed during your timeline by
Yes.
reaching out.
Well, yes, you can. And that's why we say now it's very important for you to start being informed by your so-called future self rather than your past self in order to be pulled, in a sense, toward more of that particular aspect or expression of the greater being.
And what he's actually referring to right here is actually a transmission called Children of the Future that I have. I believe I just have an audio form, but that's what he's referring to.
That is expressing itself as that individuated personality that will serve you in more positive ways.
No, you completely shift to the reality where you're that person, actually. You know everything that person knows in that moment. And then you just shift back here. It's actually really that simple. It's just a shift of your perspective in that moment.
And so often as a healing technique, people use this idea of going back and visiting a past version of themselves that may have suffered some sort of trauma.
You don't leave anything behind.
Is
you don't
that
forget
the
anything.
idea of actually you're shifting timelines to another version of you that, I mean, what's happening there?
Well, you're shifting to a version of yourself that is using another version for that purpose. In other words, constantly you are creating a third version, a third personality, a simulacrum. If you are aware of yourself in the present and aware of the idea of the version of you in the past, then there has to be a third personality that contains both of those ideas if you're using it that way.
And then those become unique scenarios unto themselves. Yes.
They do.
It's very fascinating.
It's very multidimensional. It's really important in this context for this conversation to understand exactly how holographic and multidimensional all of you actually are.
It's becoming more clear.
You never leave anyone behind. You have the version of you and the version of the souls that match and resonate with who you are at that moment. You never leave anyone behind. It's just you shift to a different version. Whether it's your family, it's a different version of your family. It's just a different version. That's all it is.
Which would be one of the symptoms of accelerating into fourth density, in that these concepts become more clear.
And it's not so overwhelming to think about the idea of all of these different versions of the self, and the idea that you can, in a sense, time travel and communicate with these different versions and help them accelerate in their experience.
Absolutely.
Yes. But again, the idea is that you don't necessarily have to pay attention to them individually in that way. That's why, again, we say that if you're simply following the formula, the ability to navigate and deal with these things in the way that actually serves the individual you are being at that moment is built in automatically to following the formula. It's not like you have to pay attention to all the details.
Just like you guys in the chat and everyone who's been watching, because we resonate in a similar way, we are able to actually connect in this way, whether it's the collective consciousness, which is the internet. It's the physicalized version of us as a collective. That's why we're able to connect in this moment in this way.
A holistic point of view or a holistic experience, by acting on your passion and following the formula, will contain whatever aspects of this whole experience you actually need to intellectually wrap your mind around. But that doesn't mean you have to be aware of every single detail to know that it's working just fine to your advantage, to your benefit.
The thing that gets us out of the present moment is focusing on what you perceive as the past or perceive as the future. It's not being present. It's kind of like you can tell when someone's really out of the present moment, they have anxiety or they have depression. Like those are really two key dead giveaways.
And then refocusing on the future self,
yes,
is what allows you to have a much more unlimited perspective of what you can become, what you can do now, what's possible.
Yes, in a sense. You still remain in the present, but you can be informed by the idea you call your future self, which most people positively will assume is in a higher state. Now, there might be some people that assume that a future self is in a lower state, but obviously that's not the choice we are encouraging you to make. The idea is that in the idealized definition of a future self, it is that version that has a more comprehensive understanding and more of an experience of utilizing the formula in a way that benefits you, so that it becomes more aware that it has the capacity to encourage you toward itself almost magnetically. So if you key into that magnetic attraction to the idea of a higher vibrational future self, you will allow yourself to gravitate through the timelines in that direction.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Yes.
Now, some questions that came up about last week and what's currently happening. Some of the...
Then realistically, if you enjoy it, you don't have to get rid of it. I mean, it's honestly not that complicated. No one's making you give up anything.
States are now opening up and loosening restrictions. Can you share with us how this is going to work out and what we can expect as a result of this?
Well, metaphorically, you are literally experimenting with different, quote unquote, states of being, so that you can see what the choices every state is making or every city is making will do with respect to the situation that you're all going through. So you're experimenting, you're opening up to experiment and see what works for you, so that again, you're giving yourself a multitude of choices. And by certain states and certain cities...
I'm sorry for the person who asked this. This was actually in the middle of the pandemic when a lot of people, when different states and countries and places were actually experimenting with the possibility of opening back up. I'm sorry, my bad.
In certain countries deciding how they wish to go through this experience, you are given a sparkling opportunity to see in your own discernment what does and doesn't work for you.
Okay, yes, I guess we are experimenting with ourselves.
Yes, different states of being.
You also mentioned that specific ecosystems have been destroyed and that as a result, that has helped to unleash this virus.
Yes, and others as well throughout your history.
So in terms of us rebuilding those ecosystems, can you make some suggestions as far as what the individual can do on their own, as well as other steps that we can take to restore these ecosystems?
Well, again, it's about taking the actions that are germane for the reality that you prefer to live in. So this is really, in some sense, quite obvious. If you have destroyed the ecosystem, restore the ecosystem. Plant trees, clean your water, clean your air. Create actions that are in alignment with the idea of the kind of world that you prefer to see. So if you want to see a more forested world, if you want to see a world with cleaner water, or you want to see or breathe in a world with cleaner air, do the things that are available to you with your technology or your abilities to actually create those things, create new environments, recreate them. It's as simple as that. Now, there are other things that you can possibly do, but remember that physical action is the language of physical reality.
John, I want to say this because it just made me think of something. You never really lose anything. whether it's you never lose your past, you never lose your future. It's you're always in the present moment. If you want to access another version of you, it's actually more like accessing a memory. It's just realizing those realities exist on a particular frequency or a particular reality that you want to actually connect to. And that's what your memories are anyways. So it's that shift to understand that you never lose anything. And you have to explore your definitions that are stopping you from doing something like accessing another incarnation or have it, because your imagination is actually the conduit to your higher mind. So if you use that conduit, it allows you to stretch to a reality where you can experience different things as well.
Therefore, the more you can actually physically do to recreate those ecosystems, bring them back, restore the world to a more natural state in all the ways that you can, find sources of energy that don't pollute, create them, spread them out over your planet in one way, shape, or form. All these things can help you begin to reach out, begin to make more connections with others, share ideas, open up your imaginations for how you can create new societies, new systems that have less impact negatively upon your planet. In some senses, many of you are beginning to do this, but the idea is keep doing it and do it in greater and greater ways with more and more people who are excited about restoring your world to a state of balance.
And because physical reality, the language of physical reality is actually physical action, you shift to a version of Earth that represents. It kind of goes back to that, what is the Mandela effect? It's you shifted from a reality where this was true, but in another reality, this is also true. Before we go too much further, I want to see one thing. How many of you guys have heard The Man from Torag? This is actually one of my favorite. Man in the Tokyo airport, they had to detain him, and then all of a sudden he disappeared. I have been to this reality where there is a country right here. I want to share that also. Like, France had a different name in that reality, as well as Spain actually had a different name in that reality. I don't remember what they are, but I do know that that's actually... but he disappeared and went back to the reality where... for that. This is another reality as well. Let's go back to it.
These things are relatively obvious. Just do more of them.
I don't know how this transmitting right now, but suddenly around me there's all these horns honking and everything.
Trying to get your attention.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so when we were talking about restoring ecosystems, they're actually quite complex because there's so many varieties and species within an ecosystem.
You got to start.
You have the ability to do it. Do your research and take the actions that are necessary. Just do the best you can. Remember, it's the actions that make the difference. Even if a particular ecosystem is not actually restored on the version of Earth you're on right now, taking the action in that direction is one of the things that will help shift you to the versions of Earth that will actually have more balanced ecosystems. Remember, you never change the world you're on.
Right, and who knows what that path will lead to if people are trying to rebuild an ecosystem. So many things can happen in that process, as interactions between people, interactions with animals, many things that we can't even imagine at this point.
But just follow the formula and take the actions, and you'll shift yourself to versions of Earth that are more and more representative of the idea of balance. And don't forget, it's not that you live in nature, you are nature. So balance yourselves as well.
So another question that's come up around this is the idea that it's a virus, not a bacteria that we're dealing with.
I'm going to jump ahead because I don't feel like listening.
What you can do is accelerate yourself so that you have the greatest capability, and that if you accelerate, if you indicating through an airlock, so that your reality and take the actions, and you'll shift yourself to versions of Earth that are more and more representative of the idea of balance. And don't forget, it's not that you live in nature, you are nature. So balance yourselves as well.
So another question that's come up around this is the idea that it's a virus, not a bacteria that we're dealing with, and the idea that viruses have consciousness.
Everything is made of consciousness. It just depends on how that consciousness is expressed. It may not be expressed in the same way that a human or a dolphin.
Well, a lot of the versions of Earth that, because I know he did answer this in another transmission, a lot of versions of Earth don't have Bashar. The versions of Earth that we're on do, and we're shifting to where we're going to become the 6th hybrid race.
Or any other animal expresses consciousness, but nevertheless, there is an expression.
And there is an infinite number of Earths. There, what we call the Greys came from a version of Earth, so they're us from a parallel reality.
Of it, it's just that it's going to be a very foreign or alien version of the expression of consciousness that you may not necessarily.
Here's another reality that I've been able to experience. When I was doing a session with Ryo, a private session, I asked him what would have happened if the dinosaurs would have never actually died out. He said they would have turned into birds. Well, when he told me that, I was able to shift my frequency and my focus in that moment to that reality where there are birds everywhere. There's dinosaurs, but they all had transformed and evolved into birds in that moment.
Necessarily be able to relate to exactly.
It's interesting because a lot of people have expressed the idea of they want to communicate with the virus. They want to get to know it. They want to create homeopathic ideas of how to work with it. Is this sensible in the sense of...
It can be if it is not done out of fear. Again, remember, everything is about resonance. It's about frequency. It's about vibration, including communication with different forms of life, or even inanimate things. So the idea is to find the frequencies that will allow you the best opportunity
or more
to commune with it in a way that isn't detrimental to yourself. Again, you'll be creating what you might call a safety zone by creating a simulacrum, a third reality in which the communications take place, so that your reality directly is not affected by your decision to alter your vibration in your respective reality. Altering the vibration in the third reality to allow for the communication to occur is like having a communication in a safety zone.
So I know, like, from a shamanic perspective, the idea of communicating with DNA and with...
Sky, well, when Yeshua came through and he was the representation, he didn't become Jesus Christ until he actually he was able to shift back to the more physical plane. I actually have an incarnation that was parallel along with him. He was a person just like any of us, but he had traveled and moved on. But when he was crucified there's versions of reality where he didn't get crucified and he just died without much effort. And then there's versions where he lived on for a bunch of years. And then there's versions where him and Mary Magdalene ended up having kids and going off into that. There's anything that you could possibly think of in that moment. What he came to do in that lifetime specifically was to start bringing the Christ consciousness through for us to actually experience and also for us to actually have in our collective. He was that representation for us.
Plant medicine and just, communicating with plants. Does that open you up to bringing that energy into your body, or that's what you're talking about by creating a simulacrum?
Yes.
You have a buffer so that you can communicate with an energy such as a virus, but not at the same time invite it into your physical being.
Correct. It's like communicating through an airlock. Now, here's something else to understand about the idea of creating what you might perceive as an elimination of that particular expression of a virus in your reality altogether. And this goes for any kind of disease as well. Many people are beginning on your planet to explore the idea of using resonant frequencies in order to allow them to mitigate the idea of disease-carrying organisms or disease-causing organisms. But the basic secret of that, the basic
Absolutely.
clue for using frequencies in that way is A, find the frequency of the organism itself, and then simultaneously, as you are embedding the organism in its own frequency, if you embed it in a harmonic of another frequency 11 times greater, then that organism will actually cease to thrive in your reality.
Yep. I had COVID, and twice. The second time I had it, I was able to shift my body to a great enough degree that it was minimal. Like, I was having really bad effects, and then I went into kind of a meditative state, and I was able to actually shift my body at a big enough scale that it just stopped existing inside of me. It just was no longer there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes.
As I drop any and all of my fear-based thought process and beliefs, what will my experience be with regard to my family members and my close friends and my children who may or may not be able to do these things? Particularly, I think there's a concern about people's children, like they can't understand this. How will the children come with them in this sense?
All right, well, maybe they will and maybe they won't. First of all, you have to understand that if you accelerate yourself, you will probably then be capable of having the inspiration and imagination to know how to communicate to your children in ways that will allow them to understand these concepts as well, and perhaps then make choices to go along, to shift along with you. That's number one. However, number two, you still have to treat children as individuals, as conscious beings that make their own choices and have their own life path. So the idea is that, yes, there may be situations where different individuals, be they family members or relationships or children, may not ultimately be capable of making the same choices and creating, or at least projecting, versions of themselves in the reality that you are going to. But again, you have to allow them to make their own choices. All you can do is accelerate yourself so that you have the greatest capability of teaching them how they can do so for themselves as well. And this goes for anyone else. You become a living example. You know exactly what to say. You understand these principles clearly enough that you can pass them along, and then give them the best opportunity, as we have said, to practice these principles so they understand how to use them, to understand that they're self-empowered, to understand the consequences of their choices, so they can make mature choices as they grow. And they will decide in that sense then where they truly need to be. But that's as much as you can do. You have to trust the whole process, that even though someone may be born to you as a child, they're still a separate individual that has their own path. And sometimes their path may not always include being in touch with you. Now, maybe they'll go out, maybe they'll come back in. It just depends. But you have to treat everyone as an infinite, indestructible being. And if somebody doesn't understand something now in this life, they'll understand it somewhere. Nothing is lost. Nothing is wasted. No one will ever be permanently lost to you, because on some other level, you will reconnect. And perhaps on that level,
I'm in Portland, Oregon as well.
Clearly why they took the path they did, and it will make sense to you at that time. But you will always be bound by unconditional love if you are unconditional in your loving.
So the idea that what will come up for many individuals under the scenario you just described is their fear of loss, their attachment to other people and things like that, and possibly even holding themselves back or making a choice to not move forward because of the anticipation.
So if you feel like if you're afraid that you're going to lose something, generally speaking, that's when a lot of people are in that state of depression. It's that state of fear that's you're allowing to hold you back. You're holding on to that fear because you believe you're going to lose something.
That it could create some kind of loss.
Yes, and this is where you anchor yourself to a reality that you're saying you don't
The shirt was a
prefer,
giveaway, wasn't it?
because you have a definition that there is such a thing as loss. Change your definition. Understand the greater selves that you are. See yourselves from a greater perspective, a higher perspective, where you know you are always in touch on some level. And that's what we're saying is when you accelerate your own vibration, one of the symptoms of going into a higher version of physical reality is you'll have the capability in your senses to be able to sense more of that being, more of that personality on another level.
As I've gone up in my frequency and my vibration, in the way my consciousness actually expresses itself, is I more perceive people vibrationally than I do. Like, I can do a lot of telling what's wrong with people just because of what I do for a living a lot faster, because I can just read their vibration and their frequency and more of them a lot faster than what I did before. So.
And you will know that you're always in touch. You will know that you're never really out of touch, even if temporarily the personality projection of that person may seem to be missing from your life, but they're not really missing if you are capable of communicating with them on a higher level. So it serves you to know you're always in touch by accelerating yourself forward and not anchoring yourself to a reality that has a definition of loss.
We should do a Bashar meetup.
Then all you're doing is reinforcing the idea that they're missing, when in fact there are many aspects of their being that may be attempting to communicate with you, but then you're the one that's missing because you're not allowing yourself to go into a state where you could perceive that more of that person, not necessarily the personality, but more of that being may be attempting to talk to.
And I will say this much, my grandfather died like 10 years ago. I have a great relationship with him still. And it's more of him, I should say.
To you. And you're not paying attention because
comes
you're not
when
in the right frame of mind.
He comes when I talk
the right
about him.
State of being to know,
like right now,
that you never actually lose anything. You just shift to a different level of understanding and communication.
Yep.
So fundamentally, it always comes back to dealing with your own state of being and whether or not you're staying in a positive state or you're succumbing, in a sense, to negative beliefs.
Not succumbing, not succumbing.
Not succumbing.
Watch the definition. Choosing. Yes. Stay in the driver's seat. Stay empowered. Use empowering definitions. Not succumbing.
How does it work? It's kind of like when you're more reading the vibration of someone, it's about becoming perceptive. So I had a person teach me this skill or thing a long time ago, that it's an exercise you can do to start training yourself to be able to perceive the difference between different energies, different frequencies, is get a blindfold and get some jelly beans. What you're going to do with the blindfold is you're going to just wear the blindfold like normal, and you're going to put the individual jelly beans in your mouth, not being able to see what they are, but it's being able to discern the difference between the different jelly beans and what flavor they have. So when you actually go to, and that should start giving you the idea of the individual frequencies that go along with the individual, with particular person, place, thing, whatever it is. It's the individual frequency that goes along with the person in that moment. Whether it's they're physical or non-physical, you just become entrenched, as well as you get to the point where you can just read the information that's being given to you, because it's more like a conversation. It's something that you match with, and you're choosing to resonate in that moment. It's kind of like two tuning forks. Even if someone's non-physical, you're able to like match the frequency and receive the information or the understanding that person's there.
choosing, because when you know you're choosing,
Just a bag with a bunch of different flavors. It doesn't really matter. It's just you're trying to learn how to actually discern and start having the awareness that there's different flavors along with anything else.
you have something to work with that you can change. If you say succumbing, then there's nothing you can do. You are powerless. Or at least you're using your power to pretend that you're powerless. And if you don't prefer to do that, watch your definitions, because they determine how you experience everything in your reality.
Yep.
This question kind of ties into this also, because someone asked if you can talk about the transition from helpless infant to fully creating adult, and whether infants are actually helpless, and is this a gradual transition, and anything that we can do to support our children in
We're
their
just
process.
going to give you a very brief answer on that. The idea again is that yes, of course, in terms of physical reality, obviously,
Just because someone's non-physical doesn't mean they're dead. There is no real death. It's just a transition.
children that are very, very young need the support and
They're alive,
guidance
just in a different form.
of the adults. But the idea again is in allowing them to become powerful, mature adults, you must allow them at whatever age seems reasonable to you to first and foremost not pick up from you telepathically the idea of fear-based beliefs. So be clear within yourself as best as you can, so you don't pass those ideas of fear along to them. Then again, as you are able to teach them using your own imagination, the idea of in a safe place that your imagination has created for them physically, teaching them through actual actions the consequences of their choices, teaching them that they are as powerful as they need to be to attract whatever they need in life without harming themselves or anyone else, and adapting any lessons in physical reality you believe are important for them to learn, adapting them to their excitement instead of dampening their excitement to fit into the lesson. These three things can empower a child to become a mature adult very rapidly, because they're already an eternal being. They're already a high intelligence, and in many cases, remember that young children haven't forgotten as much of who they are.
The easiest way to contact a deceased, well, they're not deceased. Like, you have to get over the hurdle of thinking that they're deceased just because they're non-physical. No one's really dead. Like, you, I, we've all been a million different things. It's physical and non-physical. It's getting over the idea that, hey, I'm talking to someone. At first you think it's you're imagining things because you've been told that your entire life. And second, sometimes it's just easier to use someone else as a translator to ask the question, because especially someone who doesn't have like the belief system that stops them from being like, hey, there's this person here. Just talk to them. They're still a person. They're still just, but they're in a different form. That's all it is. You have to get over your belief systems a lot of times.
And therefore, they can actually be great teachers for the so-called adults that may themselves simply be children in the process of maturing.
Also, the other thing I found that helps for being able to contact people who are non-physical is do it in the form that seems the most relevant for you. Use your imagination, like Bashar would say. Because I know he would say, how do you want to contact him? Use your imagination. And a lot of times I've found family members or people who've passed or transitioned, at first what they'll do a lot of times is kind of give you like a vision in your dream state, because it's a time that's much more easy to actually sit there and communicate with them, because a lot of your barriers are down. Like, if you ever get a chance to watch the movie that Daryl's put out called Dearly Departed, it does a pretty good job of illustrating people and non-physical, people and physical, and how that connection happens. Because a lot of times when you're meditating, especially, you'll actually you're more open to the things that are around you, because there's people around you. Like, I have a pretty good relationship with my guides these days. Like, you just pay attention to the little things, because a lot of times they will actually give you signs that they're there, and they'll be like, "Hey, how's it going?"
Right. Yes, it also comes up the idea that there are plants and animals and other beings within our ecosystems that are holding a space for us or assisting us in moving to higher frequencies.
You always have reflections that can help guide you from whether it is humans or animals or plants or rocks, doesn't matter. Everything is a reflection in physical reality.
Yep.
So you always have guidance through reflection to see if the reflection you're getting is what you prefer it to be, in the sense of, really, are you who you prefer to be? Again, not putting the conditions or the insistences that the outside must change. What we're referring to is a reflection that guides you into simply choosing the state of being you prefer, regardless of what the outside may appear to be.
Okay, and so since all living things originated from the same DNA, will animals also experience a shift in their consciousness right now?
Again, yes. The idea is that there are versions of the animals on other versions of Earth, just as you can have other versions of yourself on those other versions of Earth. In some sense, you will go together.
I'm going to shift over to another part that I wanted to show you guys.
The lower portion of the graphic will detail the idea of how you experience the concept linearly. In other words, why you actually think it is reincarnation, with the same soul having lifetime after lifetime after lifetime in linear order. As you can see from the top portion of the graphic, the idea is that the oversoul extends its...
So I was trying to find this handout last night when everyone was or the other night when everyone was asking, how am I able to actually connect to my other incarnations? If you look at the upper diagram, that's actually how I experience things. It's because I know I have an active connection to other incarnations. That's actually how I experience things.
Self into different souls represented by the different colors, so that you know they are different souls, and each of those...
So each of those are parallel versions of you, or counterparts. What you perceive as your past, perceive as your future, are all existing simultaneously. Because I know this to be true, I'm able to just jump between them as I need.
Different souls creates its own higher mind and physical mind, which is represented in the physical realm down below by the different colored boxes, which represent the different persons that you all consider yourselves to be. Individuals that are independent of one another. But what you can see by the black arrows between the squares is that this energy connection that exists, these cross connections that exist between all of the physical personalities that are going on simultaneously.
Yep.
Allows you to extract information, experience, guidance, what have you, like a giant cosmic internet, constantly exchanging information, plugging and unplugging from whatever individuals you need to in order to extract the information that guides you in life. But you can see from the top mechanism, the actual mechanism, that it's all happening at the same time.
So if you want to go back, and the reason I put this actually in this specifically, if you go back to what is the Mandela effect, looking at the diagram itself, it's the different versions of you that are actually, it's not down here. You don't just shift, you don't go from one lifetime to another, to another, to another. If you know these things to be true, you perceive it more as the upper part of the diagram, which is because everything is happening simultaneously. Your past, your future, or any other reality that you might connect to or shift to. And you got to think of this as actually dynamic. You're not just in one incarnation. You're in multiple happening simultaneously, which is where the oversoul is connecting to different realities all the time.
It all exists all at once. But now when you impose the
Fourth
idea
density. We're in
of
fourth
linear
dimension already.
space-time on the concept and allow yourself to perceive reality a moment at a time, which, as we have said, is actually a perception of the same moment, but from different points of view that you interpret as different moments linearly, one after the other, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and so forth. What happens then, from your perspective, is that the space-time reality, the space-time perspective, or what could be called the space-time
Wonderful
lens,
synchronicity.
or space-time prism, or space-time filter that you impose upon your consciousness, just like a prism bends light, the space-time filter or lens bends the idea of how the interconnections exist between different individuals, so that it no longer exists simultaneously or is perceived to exist simultaneously. It is now bent upwards to make it seem as if the same soul, that is an extension of the oversoul, is experiencing over and over and over again an incarnation in linear terms, one after the other. You can now see that the black arrow in the chart below is bent upwards to go back into the soul level, so that it appears as if the same soul is having different physical incarnations.
So the upper part, the upper diagram, is also how I'm able to tap into my other incarnations simultaneously, because I know this to be true. And you can't do anything you don't know to be true in that moment. Your beliefs will get in the way of you being able to experience things like talking to loved ones, talking to your pet, talking to a lot of things. Like, once you clear out a lot of those fear-based beliefs, your reality opens up in a way that you can't imagine.
One after the other. But the mechanical truth is the graphic up above, without the idea of the bending of the space-time reality. So you can see that just because the space-time lens makes it appear as if the same soul is having incarnation after incarnation, the truth is these are different souls, different extensions of the oversoul.
Yep.
Each of which is having its own physical experience that's connected to every other physical experience through those horizontal little black energy arrows. But again, because those arrows get distorted by the space-time lens, you perceive it in a linear fashion. Knowing that it's actually all happening at the same time, and knowing that the idea of reincarnation is an illusion, can help you understand how to live more in the moment, how to plug in and unplug to the other entities, the other physical beings that you may need to extract information and experience from, to aid and assist you and guide you in this particular life, as they may be doing with you as well to guide them in their lives. And you can understand that all beings exist simultaneously. All things do.
Yep.
So if you can allow yourself to begin to see the illusion, the distortion, in a sense, that is created by the physical space-time lens, then you can begin to operate in a more immediate, more present way, living in the moment, knowing that you can make whatever connections you need to make, knowing that you are making whatever connections you need to make, plugging and unplugging in a dynamic way. It's not a static thing. A life that you feel you're connecting to now may not necessarily be the life that you will connect to in the years to come, or you may keep recreating.
So the thing you got to remember, especially when it comes to what he's talking about, when you shift your perspective, is your past and your future are created in the moment. It's in the present moment. Like, what you perceive as a future or you perceive as your past is all created in the moment. So a version of your past, if you go back to the parallel reality wheel, which is how this all plays into it, is you're connecting to, it's the connection itself is dynamic. It's constantly changing. So your history, what you perceive as your history, is not necessarily what was there even a moment ago.
That connection, if you feel it is of benefit to you. But this is why This is the explanation for why. You have heard many people say, oh, I used to be Cleopatra. I used to be Julius Caesar in one of my incarnations. That's the perspective of the distortion caused by the space-time lens. But if you understand the simultaneity of everything, as represented by the upper portion of the graphic, you can realize, of course, any being can connect to any other being, and that's why you can have 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people all saying, I used to be Cleopatra.
I have a parallel incarnation, or one of my counterparts that I've been able to connect to actively is Picasso. Or not Picasso, but Vincent van Gogh. So that's one of my counterparts, but that's just a counterpart I connect to when I need to start painting.
Because it's not that they actually were Cleopatra, because Cleopatra exists exactly at the same time you do, but 1,000 people can make an energy connection to Cleopatra in the present, and thus download information that may, through the distortion of the physical space-time lens, make it seem as if that was you, because you're assuming that the same soul is having these incarnations over and over and over again. So this explains the idea of how a multitude of people can connect to the same individual and download whatever information they need from that individual, and understand that it's not that it was your past life, but that it is another person existing at the same time that has their own life, but you get to extract whatever information from their experience of life.
So going back to this also comes back to the idea of the Mandela effect, is as you shift through different realities or different parallel realities, the connection is dynamic. So what you may, in one moment you may have had a past life that was 12,000 years ago. Another moment you have another incarnation, a counterpart that existed 50 years before you just happened. It's your conscious. The Mandela effect is literally just your conscious. It's the remnants of it's a time-space lag, or just remnants of those realities that you had just shifted through.
You need, while they can do the same to you. Who knows how many connections Cleopatra has? Who knows how many times Cleopatra may have assumed, oh, this must be coming from one of my future lives, when in fact, again, it's all simultaneously coexistent. So, again, this helps you live more in the moment, understand the mechanisms and how different a description of the mechanism can be from a description of what appears to be the experience from a space-time lens perspective. Again, the most important thing to take away from this is the changing of your definitions from outmoded ones, outdated ones, old-fashioned ones, so that you understand that there can be a vast difference between a description of the experience, or how the experience appears to be happening, as opposed to how the experience is actually mechanically happening. So if you start from the premise of understanding that everything exists now, you can then decode, in a sense, and decipher and translate the experience, and realize that the description of the experience, again, is not necessarily a description of how it's actually happening, how the experience is being truly created. And you can start to deconstruct these ideas of old-fashioned definitions of experience and begin to truly understand the modern understanding, the modern definition for your 21st century of the actual mechanisms behind everything you experience in physical terms. So we thank you for allowing us to share with you this idea, this day of your time, to bring you more into the present and give you an opportunity to understand more deeply how mechanisms of consciousness work, so that you can learn to differentiate between the experience and the mechanism, and use modern definitions to propel you forward in understanding of how you create your reality, so that you can do so with more consciousness, more awareness, and more efficiency.
So I want to jump to this specifically. the reality that you're experiencing, whether it's your emotions or anything else, determines the reality that you shift to. So the greater shift that you happen to experience are realistically just kind of like are just reflective of who you are in that moment. Like we've all had realities where we've died, and then we shifted to different ones, and then you have another point where you could potentially die. Like there's versions of reality where Bob Saget didn't die. There's versions of reality where Prince didn't die, or Michael Jackson, or any of those people didn't die. It's just the current reality that we're in. Those people died. I mean, there's any number of realities that where we could all experience anything you could potentially think of, and a lot of things you can't think of, because I've seen some realities where there are things that I can't even describe that are not here on this planet or from a really long time ago, but also here and now. It gets confusing. You just kind of learn how to shift yourself to those realities and just understand that it's a snapshot. It's kind of like I've heard Bashar give this explanation a bunch of different times. Think of it like a film strip. In reality, everything exists simultaneously. It's that film strip, but there's no movement in any one moment. So when you're able to perceive outside of the film strip itself, you realize that you can take this film strip and hook it up with this film strip, or hook it up with this film strip, and they all still happen simultaneously. And you can, like, the greater your frequency that you adjust up, you're going to notice more of these skips from one reality to another. And that's realistically what the Mandela effect itself is. It's just recognizing that, oh, we made a big enough shift that we shifted to this reality. Yep. Sky, you didn't get lucky. You probably died, realistically speaking. You just shifted yourself on a higher perspective where you're like, hey, I might have died in that situation. No, you actually did die. You just shifted to this reality. It's not for you to actually ever convince anyone that something happened. Like I've sat there and tried to convince people that don't think along these ways, or the way I've found to actually share information with people is I don't tell them that Bashar told me these things. I just kind of share the information itself. That's why he says he's never that important. Second, she came from a reality where she experienced those things. So don't take it as refusing to believe something happened, or you came from a reality where you experienced things a certain way. So it's not necessarily that you had to convince her that those things happened. Well, it happened to you in that reality, but she's not from the same reality. Just like I've had people describe things a certain way where I didn't experience them that way, or they didn't experience it the same way I experienced. It's just your perspective shift, or the reality that you shifted from. Be easy on them, because a lot of people don't necessarily have the perspective or understanding to realize this different level of understanding. Let's go to the next clip, because I put this specifically up here for... Okay, here we go. And you guys can look at this for yourself, but here we go.
You simply take yourself, you shift yourself to another the world. You simply take yourself, you shift yourself to another series of parallel realities that are already more representative of the vibrational change within yourself, which means that parallel Earth simply already contains versions of all the other people that have also shifted themselves to that parallel reality that you've agreed will be your new mass conscious expression experience. Remember, this is all taking place in your consciousness.
Right.
The world isn't really out there.
Right.
Yes?
Right. Yes.
So, when you say what changes will take place in the mass consciousness, again, really nothing in that context is changing. The change is your perspective. So what will take place in the mass consciousness is to share another perspective of another reality that already exists that's more representative of the change in the agreement between all the individuals in the collective. Does that answer your question?
Partly.
Not quite.
Not quite.
Mass consensus, mass consciousness is a consensus idea.
Right.
You have to share, agree to share, a particular experience of a collective reality. Yes?
Yes.
So, when a variety of individuals in that collective reality decide to shift themselves to a parallel reality that is similar to one you have decided to shift to, you will still perceive each other by agreement. We both have an aspect. We have both decided, we have both agreed that we each have an aspect that already exists in that parallel earth that is more representative of the shift we have made within ourselves, the change we've made within ourselves. So you recognize that that's been done by agreement.
So you're shifting to the reality that matches you. Just kind of keep that in mind.
To reveal
Let's
what you
see.
plan to reveal.
And this is going to be...
I want to say good day to you, everyone. How are you all?
How's the sound on this?
All right, thank you. Let us begin this transmission with the title that we have chosen, called The Future of the Past. Let us begin by allowing us to read you a newspaper headline. JFK assassinated today in Boston, Massachusetts. This date, November 9th, 1968.
I can't turn this up any higher.
What does this mean?
Sorry.
This is a parallel reality, different from the one you now consider to be your history. And of course, there are many other versions of this scenario. We once shared with you that another version of your history that you experienced before the present one allowed this particular individual, your President Kennedy, to survive until your 1980s. But the one that we have mentioned today, November 9th, 1968, has a particular meaning to the history that you believe you remember. The idea is that history is not linear. It is holographic and is made of many different kinds of intrusions of parallel realities. At the very least, if not the events themselves, the effects of other events in other realities color what you consider to be your linear history. So to continue this example, the idea to remember is that what you think of history is always changing, always. When you as a collective group decide to shift to a particular parallel reality path, remember that as you become a new society, as you become new people, you also create a new history to go along with that, to make sense out of the choice that you made in the present. Because the past is created from the present, not the other way around. So you have had many histories that you are now unaware of, because every time you change, you wipe the slate and create a new history that appears to be the only history you've ever had. So, several years ago, you actually had a different history than what you remember now. But you don't know that. But because we can see the bigger picture and all the lines of intersecting energies between different parallel
When you can actually perceive those lines, because they are lines, and I've seen them, it's kind of cool to watch the shift happen. This is completely true.
realities, we can see the path that you've taken. In this particular case, let's say one of the original history choices you made was that your President Kennedy was in fact assassinated in 1968. The reason for this is because near the end of his second term, he was about to reveal the existence of extraterrestrials. The idea is that it actually was revealed. And in that particular parallel history caused so much chaos and so much collapse in your society that he was labeled as the cause of it. And someone assassinated him for that reason. Now, because of the societal collapse in that particular history that went along with the revelation of our existence, you decided to shift as a society and take another path. And to prevent it from happening, you chose a history where he died in 1963. And therefore never had a chance to reveal what he had planned to reveal. However, to illustrate the point that your history isn't linear, that it is affected by ripples from other parallel realities all the time, because the original assassination occurred in 1968 based on the idea of the collapse of society, it created a very strong eddy, a very strong current in the fabric of space-time. So even when you shifted your collective consciousness to the idea of a history in which he died in 1963, effects from the original 1968 still existed and still impacted the new history, which is why Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King were assassinated in 1968. So if you begin to understand how this actually works, you can see that what you consider to be a linear history back in time is actually composed of many different parallel reality ripples and effects that all come together and change every single time that you change your idea of what your present is. That then changes what your idea of your history ought to be in order for that history to have brought you to the new present that you're at, because you still have to do it in a linear way to play the physical reality game.
I have seen the reality where JFK did actually survive till 1985, but I've also seen the reality where he got assassinated in 1968. I've seen these realities.
But in understanding this holographic nature of history, you can never really look at the idea of history in a linear way again. You will understand that it is a composite of many different overlapping realities, and it is constantly dynamically changing every time you make any change whatsoever. Not just the societal level, but your own personal histories as well, because as you become a new person, every time you redefine yourself, you create a new history for yourself. Now, if it seems to be the same, again, this is because you have wiped the memory of the old history, and the new history...
I have shifted my consciousness to those realities that he talks about specifically in the transmission, where the civilization destroyed itself. Like, it eventually did recover, but I actually saw those realities where JFK did die, but he also survived. And like, I've been to those realities, like some of the technology that was brought into those realities via the ETs that did show up, like the technology that they shared, is kind of where people have gone to actually recover from like shifting sicknesses. And I'm trying to think the better way to put it. It's kind of all travels of the mind. You got to keep that. We do not currently have the technology here on our planet that we exist on to where we can actually shift into those realities. You can only ever shift in those realities currently through like mental travel. Like, it's just shifting your perspective to those realities where you can actually experience the reality, the repercussions of what he talks about.
Must appear to be the only history that's ever been there in order for it to make sense for the person you've defined yourself to be in present. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't sometimes choose to recreate similar events over and over and over again every time you define yourself and create a similar history to some degree. This does happen because most of you have an agreement not to necessarily go too far in breaking the continuity of your mass consensus reality about what your history ought to be based on who you consider yourselves to be or define yourselves to be.
And when, like me personally, when I actually shift to other realities, to different perspectives, I actually see myself in the bodies of people in those realities. Whatever my counterpart that corresponds in that reality, whether it's like an actual version of me or it's another incarnation that I'm taking during that time period. I can just shift my consciousness to those time periods or to those realities.
To be in the present. Nevertheless, this points out that you always, every single moment, have a choice to change your past as you change your present. And to understand that the more you wrap your mind around this, the more you allow yourself to understand how this works and how it's structured more holographically, you have more opportunity to, within relevant parameters for your life, break that continuity more and more and more. And the breaking of that continuity will create more, shall we say, fluidity and flexibility within how you experience space and time, which means you will experience an increase in synchronicity, which is physical reality's linear space-time way of showing you that all things exist at once, that they're all interconnected. You will increase your experiences of things like deja vu, which is experiencing the idea of the forward arrow of time and the backward arrow of time simultaneously. Mm-hmm. Because you have the feeling in deja vu that you know what's about to happen because it feels like it's already happened before. So you're getting both arrows of time simultaneously by expanding your consciousness to incorporate that idea. You will increase many other kinds of experiences in physical reality. But what it will mostly allow you to do when you really understand this concept is truly be more lucid in the physical reality dream and truly be more conscious about the kinds of choices you are making, the kinds of ways in which you define yourself and what's true for you, and exactly what that does to the entire linear space-time reality when you do that. And it will give you more understanding of how you are creating your reality experience, because physical reality is just a projection. It's just a dream. And it's all about becoming more and more lucid in the physical dream and waking up in that lucidity. And then knowing more and more, and again, whatever way is relevant for you, that you can bend the idea of space and time because you're actually doing it all the time anyway. It's just that you're becoming more conscious of the mechanism.
Also, the more you act on your assignment and the more you actually just do what he talks about in the different transmissions, you become more like how the Sasani operate. And that's how I was able to connect to my counterpart in their civilization, at least the strongest one that I have a connection to. I can feel him peering through my eyes, but I can also peer through his eyes, and I've seen Sasani. It is gorgeous and very natural. There's some structures, but for the most part, it is an amazing looking planet.
That you're using. That's what's going on in this transformational age. You're becoming more conscious of what you're already doing. It's no longer being seen in an illusionary way as if it were real.
Like as I'm speaking to you guys right now, I can actually feel him, the Sasani, the Eshikani's counterpart, actually peering through my eyes as I speak to you.
Real, you're beginning to break through the veil and see it for the illusion that it is. Now, this won't completely go away while you still choose to be physical, but it will give you a lot more flexibility in how you experience your physical reality. It will still always be relevant. Whatever comes up will always be relevant for the life path you chose, for the theme you chose to explore. It won't go beyond that relevance. But there are different degrees of relevance for many different people on your planet. So many of you will start to experience more magical experiences in physical reality. You will see that it is more flexible, more synchronous, and always has been. It's just, again, that you're becoming more and more aware of it. So the idea is that in the future, your history will really start to more consciously match what you define yourself to be in the present. So the future of history, the future of the past, is very open, very flexible, and you're beginning to understand that the past is just as indeterminate as the future is. That the probabilities of what might become your future also are the probabilities of what might become your past. Because these are both projections from the only place you actually exist, the present. That's all there is. There is only here, there is only now. So everything that is happening, everything that you think will happen, everything you think has happened, is just another projection, another reflection, another perspective of the now. And that's why when you change the now, everything else has to change, both the future and the past, because they're just reflections of what you're defining yourself to be now.
So if you want a good permission slip and a good way of understanding it, if you guys have watched the movie Everything Everywhere All at Once, that's actually how it works. Thanks. Yeah. But if you want a good understanding of how you shift parallel realities, look at Everything Everywhere All at Once. That's actually a good descriptor of what he's talking about. It's a permission slip for us to understand how to shift between different realities.
And are as ephemeral as a reflection in a mirror. They do not have real solidity. You play the game that they do, and that's fine. But now is the time to allow yourself some leeway, some permission to break that continuity to the degree that truly serves you to experience yourself as the creator of your reality experience. Because remember, as we have said before, your natural state is one of spirit. You're all still in spirit right now. It's just that you're dreaming that you're not. That's what physical reality is. You have never left spirit. You can't leave spirit, but you can dream that you can. And that's what this is. And we're sharing that dream together by agreeing to do so. And remember that you are redefining yourself billions of times per second. Your consciousness is slipping through billions of parallel reality frames per second. So at any given moment, you are always back to zero. You always have a clean slate. You always have the ability to redefine yourself in whatever way is truly relevant for the theme you chose to explore. And there's a lot of leeway in that. None of you are stuck in any way, shape, or form, especially not in this day and age. This is all about understanding consciousness, that you are an expression of consciousness, and that time and space are your illusions to play with, are your projections, are your tools to discover yourself from a new perspective, a new point of view. Because if you don't forget who you are, you can't remember who you are from another point of view. That's why you have this physical dream. To discover a new idea of yourself, a new perspective of yourself, a new relationship to all that is of yourself as an aspect of all that is. Does this make some sense to you?
So does this make sense to you guys as well? I tried to pull the clips that I could to actually explain it in a very as cohesively as I could, but this just kind of brought everything into one understanding. If you guys really want a great sorry about that, reasons. I tried to bring it as much as I could into one cohesive thing as much as possible, but this gives a pretty good, as clear as I possibly could. Think of the Mandela effect as the eddy from another reality that you shifted from. It's just the remnant. It's just letting you know that you made a big shift to this reality when you remember things differently. It's like the Bernstein versus the Bernstein. I remember personally Bernstein Bears growing up. I remember a lot of stuff, but in this reality, it's Bernstein Bears. I'm not going to say that it's wrong. It's just the reality I'm in currently. And I know that I'm going to shift to other parallel realities, and there will be remnants from this one and other ones that are similar to it. And also, if you guys just remember this, if you're also resonating with what I'm talking about, a good portion of the time, you're actually also having a Sasani being incarnating in your body currently. Like, you also are part of the Eshikani or the Sasani people. Because right now, currently, a good 70% of their actual civilization is incarnated on the planet right now. So you are actually part of that same civilization. Just like I am, just like Bashar is, just like April or anyone else who feels drawn towards this kind of information, because we are all spirit, we are all that is, just from different perspectives. We're all brothers and sisters and family. So if you have any questions that you want to ask, because I don't really have much else to show you today, but this is how I wanted to just kind of explain everything in as cohesively as possible. But this is kind of like the information I wanted to share with y'all. Make sure you guys like, comment, and subscribe and all that good stuff. If you want to have that understanding, really, I suggest go watch Everything Everywhere All at Once with this perspective in mind. When you actually watch it as a permission slip as to how to experience parallel realities, it's more of the mind, how you shift to those realities. So, have a great day. I hope you all finish whatever you need to for the day, and I'm glad I can share these sessions with you guys. So any last minute questions, because I'm going to leave this up for just a couple more minutes before I turn it off. Thank you for showing up, and I'm glad I could share what I have with you guys. Have a great day.